Well, Singapore's population has dipped for the first time since 2003. More Singaporeans face the dual pressures of raising young children while caring for the elderly at the same time.
In less than 10 years, there could be more funerals than baby showers in Singapore. And here's exactly why that will happen. For starters, Singapore's birth rate has been declining for decades. And today, the numbers paint a worrying picture for one of Asia's richest countries. So here's the headline. For the first time in its history, the fertility rate in Singapore has dropped below 1.0 births per woman, hitting the 0.97 mark in 2023. But that's not the only headline. At the same time this is happening, Singapore's population is also aging rapidly. And this means that by the early 2030s, population projections suggest that the number of deaths in Singapore could be higher than the number of births, marking a significant demographic shift in this famous tiny island nation. But here's the thing, this isn't just about fewer babies being born. It's a signal of profound changes ahead for Singapore's economy, Singapore's society, and Singapore's future. So let's start with numbers. In 2023, Singapore recorded only 33,500 live births. And this number is notable because first, it was a 5.8% drop from the previous year. But second, it was the lowest figure in over 50 years. Now, having such a high drop means that the country's fertility rate is obviously crashing. At the current rate of 0.7 births per woman, it means that on average, women in Singapore are having one or fewer kids. And that marker is far below the 2.1 births per woman rate, which is required to maintain a stable population from generation to generation. But while fewer births are being recorded each year, the number of deaths is also steadily climbing due to an aging population, which is why, according to Singapore's Prime Minister, this mix of low births and high deaths could mean that by the early 2030s, the country could start to see natural population decline, which is what happens when there are more people dying than are being born in any country. So what exactly is driving these trends in Singapore? First, there's the issue of fewer younger people choosing to have children, because there are economic pressures playing a huge role here. Even though Singapore is right up there as one of Asia's richest countries, as you could probably tell by the outrageous displays of wealth in the movie Crazy Rich Asians, the cost of living in Singapore is also notoriously high.
How much money should you be making annually so that you can live comfortably here in Singapore?
Cost of living is really high here. 120K.
Everything is expensive, from housing to education to healthcare. And so for many young couples, the financial burden of raising a child is simply too much to handle. In fact, surveys in Singapore have revealed that the concerns about cost of living and work-life balance are among the top reasons that couples are delaying having children, or in some cases, avoiding having kids altogether. So essentially, this is part of a global cultural shift where today's generation of young people appear to be prioritizing personal freedom and career growth, given the comparative cost of starting a family. Now, let's talk about the aging population in Singapore, because the population there is not just shrinking, it's also growing older very fast. As of 2023, about 17% of the population was already aged 65 or older, and this number is only going to get higher. Current estimates suggest that the share of the population in Singapore that's older than 65 is expected to rise to about 33%, which is a third of the country, as early as 2050. So what is the long-term impact of having fewer births and an aging population for Singapore? This means fewer working-age individuals will be available to support the growing population of elderly people. And that single statement has so many implications across the economy, across healthcare, across pensions, and even social services. Because a shrinking workforce means less productivity, which will result in a weaker economy in the long term. But a shrinking workforce also means having fewer taxpayers, which places a heavier financial burden on the younger generation to fund and maintain social services and healthcare through their taxes, while also having to contribute a lot more to pensions than generations before them. It's basically like trying to run a relay race, but the baton keeps getting heavier while the team also has fewer runners. But the truth is, this demographic shift and challenge isn't exactly unique to Singapore. In fact, this is a pretty common phenomenon across all of Asia. For example, Japan, which is often seen as a cautionary tale, has been grappling with similar issues for decades. With a fertility rate of 1.2 births per woman, Japan's population is both aging and shrinking. The country is now seeing entire rural towns become ghost villages as young people migrate to urban centers and birth rates start to decline. Meanwhile, South Korea faces an even more dramatic and drastic situation as its fertility rate has plunged to 0.72 births per woman, which is the lowest in the world. Both of these two countries are struggling to balance the economic and social pressures of a shrinking and aging population with the challenges of maintaining a growing economy and innovation. In the case of Singapore, the demographic story here is one of contrast and ironies. Fewer cribs, but more hospital beds. Fewer playgrounds, but more retirement homes. And of course, in the future, fewer baby showers, but more funerals. It's an ongoing shift that will basically redefine the country's future. And the big question, of course, here is, how exactly will Singapore adapt to these changes? Now, we don't have the answers today, but one thing is certain. The choices made now will shape Singapore for decades to come. In a country where more funerals than baby showers could become the norm, Singapore's ability to reshape its country as it did in the 1980s and 1990s will be put to the test once again. The tiny island country is already one of the world's biggest economic miracles, and over the next decades, it will need to rethink and make policies to create a different type of miracle. And if you want to learn about how the Philippines is experiencing the exact opposite of this problem with too many babies, you should watch this video next.